Bring me the greatest bear ass.
Hello and welcome. This is House of Bards. I'm Beth and this is Alex.
Hello.
We are a podcast about role-playing games and the character development therein of how to create a world, how to do stuff. We didn't have a proper episode last week because mistakes sometimes happen and no one's perfect.
Yeah.
And the gap between man and technology is sometimes vast.
Yes. I feel if we do the magic versus technology episode, this may reflect which side we come down on. So, this week, we are going to talk about creatures, like monsters, enemies, and environments that they might live in, that the players might have to navigate. Monsters are perhaps not the backbone of a lot of role-playing. They don't even appear in some role-playing games, but certainly in games like D&D, monsters are a pretty big part.
Yeah, they're I guess they really fulfill the dragons criteria of the Dungeons and Dragons bit. Though not necessarily always dragons, but Dungeons and Bugbears, not really that catchy of a title.
But yeah, monsters are good because they represent obstacles that sit in the player's way of completing some kind of task that are able to, like, not just sit there and be like a wall that they have to get over or something, which is important, I think, for challenging players and also for, like, expressing the inherent danger of a particular environment, which might be relevant to your story.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind,
I think it's important to remember that it depends where a creature lives and where you're going to encounter it. You know, you're probably not going to encounter a polar bear in a forest.
Yes, that's very true. When we talk about monsters and we talk about environments, those two things are quite closely married together in terms of what's going to appear where, what makes sense thematically to turn up in what kind of environment, and the sort of threats that players can learn to expect from certain environments, which as a player is perhaps a good thing to know.
Yeah.
It's not honestly even really metagaming.
Yeah, it's common sense, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just using your brain.
I mean, maybe if there are like
It's-
specific monsters that you think will turn up in certain environments that are like, you know, properly made up, maybe that's going a little bit into shady territory. But if you think, this is a very cold tundra-like place, so I'm probably going to encounter a lot of like furry, cold-based monsters here. That's not really like a huge stretch of the imagination.
Although I guess it's always good to keep your players on the toes and, you know, throw a yeti in a tropical island every once in a while. But there's got to be a reason why that yeti's there.
Oh, for sure. It's fine if a monster is dissonant with the environment that it's in, as long as there's a reason. In general, when it comes to like placing enemies in front of the players and the makeup of the environment, you can do pretty much anything so long as there's a reason for it. I feel like some DMs might say that that's like not incredibly important because it's not going to come up in the game, and honestly I feel that the likelihood that it might is sufficient that it's a good idea to do.
And it also enriches the world a bit, doesn't it? If you have monsters that are out of place and you can explain why they're there. It kind of links back into the technology episode a bit, doesn't it?
But I think even if the things aren't particularly dissonant, just knowing a lot of the reasoning behind that is good. Like, that's good information to have because it means that you can take encounters and players navigating environments in a lot more different directions depending on what your players do. Like, for instance, if they encounter some kind of monster, all right, where does this creature live? Presumably here. Where does it come from? Not necessarily here. You know, it might not be the same kind of environment that it's used to. You could ask questions like, is it intelligent? Which opens up a whole load of topics, like, you know, whether it can be reasoned with, whether it's like just wandering there or whether it has an agenda. It also means like in combat that's going to be important. Like, how does it engage?
Yeah.
Animals and like
Um,
animal-minded monsters quite often. I see DMs who'll like make them fight to the death, and honestly, there are only a small number of like scenarios where they would even do that, where that would make sense.
yeah. Like, animals that are desperate for food would definitely fight to the death, because it's like, well, if I don't kill you, I'm going to die anywhere
Yeah,
later
and
on.
it's also if they're like protecting their nest or den,
Yeah, yeah.
or if they're being forced by a greater threat like towards you, and they're desperate about something, then they might like fight to the death. But otherwise, it's really not worth their while. And quite a lot of like non-military sapient beings as well would probably have the same philosophy. I mean, it's perfectly fine for the players to disengage from combat when they're like when they think they're gonna lose a fight. So why do you think that the monsters wouldn't?
Yeah. And obviously that's totally different if players are seeking out a monster, if they have to go kill this specific creature in order to complete a quest or favour from someone.
Bring me the
Because that's
greatest
different.
bear ass.
Bring me 10 bear asses! And, God, bear ass. Anyway. But that's the players seeking something out, and it's entirely possible that part of the difficulty of that is the fact that once the creature cottons onto, these people are going to kill me and possibly rip the skin from my still warm corpse, I have to get out of here and make it back to my den and escape, and that's part of the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, when it comes to sapient beings, strictly regimented militant sapient beings like hobgoblins might well fight to the death if they're ordered to. And sapient beings who, like, maybe paladins who have like a strong sense of personal honor, they might also fight to the death if they believe that the fight is just. But beyond that, yeah, it's not a thing that people or animals generally do. It's not worth your while. It's like, who even are these people? Why should I get myself killed fighting them? I can just run away and not have to deal with them, or like come back later with more people or something. Think about the reasoning behind a monster encounter and you'll know a lot more about how the monster might behave. And actually, that thing about like coming back with reinforcements, that's a good idea if you like that idea in terms of the monster's behavior, but you don't really like letting the players off the hook for every fight. It's like, okay, what does the players winning that fight mean to the monster that's still alive? Like, what significance does that have? Because it probably does have some. It's like, oh, they've taken our territory. They've taken my territory. I am bear. They are endangering something that I don't want them to get near, or it's a matter of personal honor. Not enough to get killed over, but gonna come back and beat them up. So yeah, like knowing about what the motivations of your monsters are, even just a little bit, is really going to help with that.
Like most creatures in the world, all they want to do is survive and live, but occasionally, yes, and some creatures want to protect as well. But obviously, creatures that are a bit more intelligent. I mean, this is even in the real world, crows and elephants, many other creatures have a sense of revenge. If you do something bad to an elephant, you might be in for it. And crows can remember faces as well, and then they tell other crows. So this does happen in real life. Intelligent creatures do have a sense of vengeance.
Of course, something else to consider in terms of environments is it's a good idea to think about, like, why is this here? And even beyond that point, okay, we've established that this is here. What about the people and the animals and the monsters that live here? Like, what are they going to be like? Maybe if it's a very oppressive climate in that environment, then the people there are going to be a bit harsh and a bit hardy, because it's not easy to live there.
Yeah. People who live in sunnier climates tend to be a bit more free and easy with affection. That isn't. I'm not calling everyone from the Mediterranean slutty. I just want to. I mean, friendly, platonically friendly. I'm not implying any kind of people from the Mediterranean are very friendly and amiable and passionate about life. Whereas if you've ever travelled to the north of England, you'll know we're all miserable fucking bastards. So
Can confirm. So yeah, it's I think good to have a variety of environments in your game world, just because that means you have a variety of stages on which to set a variety of encounters and have like different kinds of people with different kinds of outlooks on life. So that's a good idea.
yeah,
You do run the risk of running into like Minecraft syndrome, where you've got like a bunch of very, very
Yeah.
diverse biomes sitting right next to each other if you haven't quite made your world big enough.
yeah. You've got like this amazing, wonderful, icy tundra winter wonderland that just cuts off straight into desert, and it's like, wait, what?
Yeah. But yeah, it is a good idea to do that, because then you can be like, okay, this is tundra, so the people who live here are going to be pretty hardy, probably going to move in small communities, hunt a lot, don't grow a lot. Whereas,
No. If some people live on the edge of just a forest, they're probably, maybe a farming community, and they're a bit more settled, and they maybe there's probably like some mysticism about the forest in some way. Don't go into the forest at night, etc. Which is completely fair. We might be skipping ahead topics slightly, but I know that people that live by rivers often have like river hags, don't they, in their folklore?
yeah,
It's quite a
quite a
common
lot
thing.
of monsters that turn up in folklore, at least in European folklore, will be related to things like environments that are nearby and that are understandable.
Yeah.
I think with that we could go into the topic of creating your own monsters, because
Yeah.
at some point you're going to have to do that. No matter how much of the stuff from the monster manual you're like, I'm going to use that in this convoluted situation, eventually you're
Yeah.
going to run out, and there's going to, more likely, you're going to run a scenario where there's like a specific enemy that your players need to fight that isn't really like human and can't be templated as an NPC, but isn't really in like the monster manual as it stands. And of course, if like it's not entirely your idea, then that problem will get like less bad in the future when there are more supplements released to the monster manual, which I presume will happen. It has happened in pretty much all editions up until now, so I don't see why it wouldn't happen with 5th edition, and indeed, if you're running earlier editions, it has probably already happened. In this particular situation, a website I would recommend for 2nd edition is called lomian.de. I think that's the site itself. You might have to go further down the tree for what I'm referring to, but it's basically a compilation of all of the monster manuals for 2nd edition, with the monsters not sorted but visually tagged by setting origin. So it will tell you if a monster first appeared in like Spelljammer or Dark Sun or Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk, or was just in the monster manual to begin with, which is really, really good. Or at least I find it really, really good, because the actual monster manual doesn't do this, which is really, really helpful when you're looking for... The two that I like having separate are Spelljammer and Ravenloft, because Ravenloft and Spelljammer have monsters in them that don't necessarily fit into anything else very well. Dark Sun has kind of the same problem. And of course, Planescape, but Planescape can sometimes like work out all right. But I know I've had problems with like Ravenloft in particular, where I'm like, obviously now there's Varash in Dawnsomber, which can like take all the really creepy gothic horror Ravenloft stuff, but there wasn't before, and then it was like, this stuff doesn't really fit into my world very well. But yeah, really, really good resource, lomian.de. I will put a link in the video description. So if you're playing 2nd edition, or if you're willing to do the legwork to convert those monsters to other editions, it's a really, really good just compilation of all of the monsters that were ever like released for that edition. But I've gone slightly off topic, I think, because we were talking about making your own monsters, weren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you will eventually have to do this. Because there'll be some part of your plot that requires a custom monster, and if it's an actual monster, this is something I at least would recommend you be quite careful with, because generally there'll be an aesthetic to your campaign that is keyed around like the culture and folklore of a certain like society in real life, and a lot of our cultures in reality have like folkloric milieus, as it were, as like there's sort of like weird, vaguely defined, unwritten rules about what aesthetically fits into like different cultures' folklore, and it's much easier to like determine from the end result whether it's worked or not, because you can look at something and be like, okay, yeah, that looks like it could be from German folklore or from like English folklore or whatever, than it is to actually properly like know what than it is to tell while you're making the thing what that might what those qualities might be that fitted in there.
Like a lot of European folklore is to sort of reinforce behaviour, like don't go into the woods at night, don't get too near the river because it will, don't get too near the river and running water because it will, sweep you in and drag you down tide. Don't skip church because religion, that kind of a thing.
Isn't there
isn't
there a poem about that?
The Lambton Worm.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what the Lambton Worm is, it is this poem or legend, and it's from northeast England, and it takes place on the River Wye, and it's honestly one of the most famous pieces of folklore that we have. It's a bit of oral tradition, a bit of pantomime. I remember being quite young and seeing a Punch and Judy show about this, although obviously not Punch and Judy, because Punch and Judy's a different kind of show to the Lambton Worm. But the puppeteer was very good. He had like a big like Lambton Worm puppet. Anyway, and it revolves around John Lambton, and he's the heir of the Lambton estate in County Durham, and he battles a giant worm or a dragon. It's a dragon, really, and it's been terrorizing the local villages. And the story generally is that he, he skipped church to go fishing one day because he's a fucking fuckstick of a person, apparently. But what really makes this stand out is the very thick Geordie accent you read the poem out in, which I will now commit to. But I gotta get in character. Biker Grove, okay. One Sunday morn young Lambton went a-fishing in the Wye, and catched a fish upon his hook, and thought it looked very queer. But what and of fish it was, the young Lambton couldn't tell, and he went a fish and carried him, and soon oiled it down a well. And then the chorus goes like this. Wish lad had you gobs, and I'll tell you all an awful story. Wish lads had you gobs, and I'll tell you boot the worm. New Lambton felt inclined to gan, and fight in foreign wars. He joined a troop of knights that cared for neither wounds nor scars. And he went off to Palestine, where queer things him befell. I very soon forgot about the queer worm in the well. I should state that queer meant a different thing back then, but it is funny to pretend that queer things happened to John in Palestine. But the worm got fat and grewed an awful size. He'd great big teeth, a great big gob, and great big googly eyes. And when he neats and crawled about to pick up bits of news, he felt dry upon the road, and milk a dozen coos. I really don't think Geordies say cows like coos, by the way. I've talked to Geordies. They just say cow. Anyway, this fearful worm would often feed on calves and lambs and sheep, and swallow little bairns alive when laid down to sleep. And when he'd eaten all he could, and he'd had his fill, he crawled away and lapped his tail 10 times round Penshaw Hill, which is Penshaw Hill, it's a local landmark in Newcastle. The news of this most awful worm and his queer gannons on, damn it, soon crossed the seas, got to the ears of brave and bold Sir John. So arm he came and catched the beast and cut it into halves, and soon stopped his eating bands and sheep and lambs and calves. So now you know all about the folk on both sides of the Wye, lost lots of sheep and lots of sleep, and lived in mortal fear. So let's have one to brave Sir John that kept the bairns from harm, saved coos and calves by making halves on the famous Lambton Worm. Now, lads, hide me gob, Now, lads, about the story. Sir John Clever's job with the awful Lambton worm.
I'd have offered to help, but I've got the poem in front of me, and I honestly would not have done better. I think Beth has the upper hand over me here by having actually met Geordies.
Yeah.
I will interject though that there's quite a lot of places in the north of Great Britain that share this particular piece of dialect, but for some of our more geographically diverse listeners who may not know, a bairn is a small child. I think technically it can refer to any kind of child, but it's generally supposed to mean a child under the age of 10. So the Lambton worm eats children, among other things.
Yeah.
Which, given it's presumably around the time of the Crusades, was probably not as horrifying as it is now, at least in comparison to having your cows and sheep eaten, because you can make more children. It's sad when they die, but if all your cows and sheep are dead, you're probably going to die in the winter, and then you'll be all dead and you can't make any more children, so you lose your children as well.
But I mean, in the end, the problem was sorted out anyway, because John came back from Pallenstein from his big gay adventure, apparently, and killed the worm. We don't judge you, Sir John, not on this podcast. That's not what the Crusades were, by the way. They were a terrible, horrible thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fucked up.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that in mind, different cultures have different ways of defining aspects of their folklore. In a lot of Western Europe, here and I think in France and Germany and so on, there'll be a lot of folklore that is about, as you said, cautionary tales to reinforce behaviours, and it'll be based on familiar concepts. So quite a lot of the monsters in our folklore will be giant or otherwise more dangerous versions of animals that people would be aware of. So we have stories about really big dogs, for instance.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the French have werewolves, don't they? Which is the ultimate form of man and beast, really, isn't it? I'm pretty sure werewolves started in France anyway.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe.
But yeah, they're all about generally either deep-seated fears or they're about deep-seated fears or they're moral tales generally. That's what I'm trying to get at.
But by comparison, so I have heard, if you look at say Japan, quite a lot of the monsters in their folklore are allegorical for feelings or behaviors or something like that. There's a deeper message behind the story of the monster rather than having a very practical application in the world. So they have a more philosophical meaning rather than just a way of controlling behavior. I
mean, I'm not sure what a kappa's deep philosophical meaning is.
I try not to ask, to be honest.
I mean, they have the I mean, they suck people's organs out through their bum holes. I don't know what the deep philosophical meaning of that is. Don't go into strange. I don't know. Don't do that. Is it okay? I don't know.
Of course, I don't know how much of this is particularly relevant in a world where all of the folkloric monsters are real. That might be bad.
Yeah.
But really, I'd say take your time. If there's a particular aesthetic you're trying to fit a monster into, you might not get it right first try. So try and research on the particular aesthetic that you're probably ripping off, unless you're going to be very multicultural and jumbly, or if you're doing science fiction, then whatever. But do take your time and do a little bit of research, I think, about what kind of themes are likely to go down well. Something that you can do that's very quick is templating a monster off another monster. You're probably going to do this anyway in cases where a monster that is an incredibly simple concept that happens not to exist in the monster manual is something you need. For instance, a giant spider that's bigger than the spiders that are already in the monster manual. You're okay, I'll just take the stats from one of these other similar monsters and they'll be fine. Maybe add a boosted up version of the attack of the actual giant spider or something. But you can also take variants of existing monsters and change them up for different environments. There are different kinds of particular animals that live in the desert or live in the tundra, foxes. There's Arctic foxes, and then there's foxes that live in forests and shit, and bins. There's the bin fox, That's a variant of foxes. I know zoology.
Yeah.
But no, like seriously, you can have like the small, like big-eared one that lives in the desert, and you can have like the really like chubby, fluffy one that lives in the. And like often that will probably just be aesthetic, that you have like different variants. But sometimes you'd be like, okay, maybe this particular variant has like giant horns because they live in a much smaller space, so they like fight each other a lot, and then you have to contend with that. There's a whole lot of stuff that you can make up just by making variants on existing monsters, which saves you a lot of work. If I could make a personal request though, when you are making monsters, mimics that turn into things that aren't chests, please. So many times in like so many monster manuals and so many games, I see mimics, and the only thing that mimics can turn into is chests. And never in any of these implementations is it actually explicitly stated that the only thing that mimics can turn into is chests. It's just that's the only thing they do turn into.
My favourite one is mimics as doors. I do remember playing a D&D game, or was I watching it? I don't know, can't remember. Where they went to go through a door, and it was in fact a mimic. And they had like quite a long conversation with the door beforehand, so they would have assumed it was a mimic, right? But nah, they just went straight ahead inside and got eaten. They did manage to defeat it, and they punched it out in the end and brutally murdered the innocent mimic. He was just trying to get a meal. Poor mimic.
Yeah. I've done mimics as doors before, and
yeah,
there's a whole load of items that people use all the time that a mimic could turn into and reasonably expect to find prey as. Like
a mimic is a torch. Can you imagine? Yeah. Just like, oh, we're gonna get some. Oh God, no, my arm. Where's
absolutely.
it gone?
Mimics as trapdoors. Mimics as the floor, ceiling, or walls. Those do tend to exist. Yeah. Often, like a monster manual will have a variant of the mimic that like explicitly turns into the environment. But consider like Mutavault from Magic, because you know that thing's like the whole cave in the picture. Like the whole cave is the Mutavault. Maybe a mimic does that, and you walk into the cave, and it's like the cave from Star Wars, and then suddenly the mimic eats you, and you have to fight your way out. That could happen. It would have to be a pretty big mimic or a pretty small cave, but that could happen.
You can do it, yeah.
I don't know. I really like mimics that don't turn into treasure chests, because treasure chest mimics are boring and predictable, and that's like the exact opposite of what mimics should be. Yeah.
When we have I remember in our game there was that chest full of the coin monsters.
Oh right, yes. If you go on Lomian DE, you will find a monster called the Lock Lurker, which is a kind of like interdimensional scorpion, but with the body of a coin. And the way you're supposed to use them is that like you put them on desks or something to like protect your valuables from petty burglars, and like the burglar comes in, sees the coin, thinks, oh, a coin, attempts to pick up the coin, and like the Lock Lurker like stings them with the tail that it keeps in another dimension, which is honestly the only ridiculous part of this monster, and they're paralyzed. And I looked at this and I thought, well, I could probably do a little bit better than that. So what I did is, on a level with like various other dangers in it, I included a chest, like the payroll chest, and like you open the chest and it's full of like thousands of gold pieces, and the player's like, okay, it's probably going to be kind of difficult for us to take this away, but we can't pass it up, it's just here. So they like empty it out and try and stuff their like bags and pockets full of these coins. Every single coin was a Lock Lurker. So there's just like this carpet of Lock Lurkers just scuttling towards you and like running up your arm and stinging you, and you're paralyzed.
Yeah. Unless you're married, in which case you just shove both hands in the chest with reckless abandon because you're a rogue.
And just get immediately paralyzed.
Yeah, never live it down.
Yeah. So that's another thing. Use existing monsters in unexpected ways. Maybe this kind of monster doesn't normally work in groups, but it's somehow being forced to. So how does that change the strategic dynamic, and how does it change how you come across it? Maybe this monster does normally work in groups, but currently isn't, and is intelligent enough to know that it's going to get killed real quick if it just does its normal tactics. That's actually a really good way of like getting players to fight monsters that generally come in groups, but for which a group would be too high level for them, and it wouldn't feel fair. Be like, okay, there's one, it's a solitary one, and it's maybe going to behave a bit differently. There's a lot you can do with monsters, and also we've talked about monsters and the environment. Like, don't be afraid to have those two things work together. You can look up Oh, what's the story called? It's the name of the guy, I can't remember. Yeah, you can look up Tucker's Kobolds for an example not only of how like enemies can behave a bit differently to keep them relevant, but also how enemies can interact with the environment in order to harass the players. It's a really good article to familiarize yourself with if you're worried that your encounters are becoming a bit too boring. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think monsters, when you put them under a lot of stress or pressure, even creatures and animals, are going to react sometimes in unexpected ways, especially if they've been in captivity. Which all of the examples that I'm thinking of are all really sad, because I spent last night watching really sad nature documentaries like Blackfish and that one about the elephant that went on a rampage and had to be shot dead in Hawaii. So I'm just thinking of really sad examples, but yeah, creatures in captivity are under a lot of stress and sometimes react in unexpected ways and differently to how they would react in the wild, where they can just go away and remove themselves from certain situations.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like, sapient beings will react very unpredictably because they're people, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, they can think just like you and I can, and therefore they have all the reasoning power we have, and they will try and do unexpected things because they know that humans and human analogues generally don't adapt well to unexpected things. Of course, not that that always has to be the case. Maybe you have, like, a race that, like, adapt very well to a changing, like, constantly changing environment, but don't really, like, learn anything long term, so doing the same thing again and again is the way to defeat them. But that's maybe getting a little creative. Something I always like to think about for monsters, though, is how does this monster interact with its environment? And if there's a big plot hole as to how it does, then it's worth exploring. In Dawnsomber, I have dragons. Like, dragons aren't animals. I mean, they're sapient, so yeah, okay, they're not quite animals. But also, like, dragons are basically demons that are native to the material plane. Because you look at a dragon and you think, this thing is way too fucking big to survive in an ecosystem that is not composed almost entirely of other dragons of various sizes. Like, so to get around that, I'm like, okay, dragons do not actually need to eat or drink or breathe anything. They just do to spite you.
Yeah, I'm of the mind of, what's the dragon horde for then? Obviously that's what they use for sustenance. Though a dragon horde can be various things. It can be gems and jewels and stuff like that, and gold. Or it could be books. But you shouldn't eat books, that's bad. But, a dragon that hoards things, and therefore that's what it gets its sustenance off, is material objects. Because I guess a dragon doesn't have to be an inherently natural creature, if that makes sense. Just because it kind of looks like a big lizard. Why would it not have magical properties in of itself? Because they do in Asian folklore, so why not in Western folklore?
That's certainly something to consider. Personally, like, my dragons, there's only ever been one dragon that has a dragon horde, and he actually, like, uses it to pay people, because his whole deal is manipulating other sapient beings, so he has a reason for it. But, like, otherwise, it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. It's like, hey, dragon, you don't interact with society that values those materials at all, so why do you have it? And, like, a lot of the time, if you look at, like, some of the source material for that kind of myth, it's like, it's a power thing. Because as long as the dragon has the dragon horde, people who, someone else doesn't have it. And that's what's the thing why they like it.
Dragons are literally evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm gonna have all this money so the poor can't have it. I could give it all to charity, but I fucking won't. Sure, I could pay off, like, several student loans, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna just sit on my giant pile of money and swim around in it like Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if 1%ers need to eat the gold they accumulate, because that would make sense.
They do actually eat money.
Yeah.
I will take it with me in my bowel. Okay, yeah, so do think about how and if a monster actually fits into the ecosystem of its environment, or whether, like, it's an invader. Because it could be like rabbits. because
Oh yeah.
there never used to be any rabbits in the UK, and then
Yeah, it was just
and then
hares,
somebody
wasn't it?
brought rabbits and they started breeding everywhere, and now we have native rabbits. That has happened a fuck ton of
Although
times.
we're generally okay in this country because we've got foxes, so that kind of works out.
Yeah, but we don't do that shit anymore. Do you know that as an island we
No,
are
yeah,
rabies free?
obviously.
Yep,
Ah.
there are a whole load of other rabies-free islands where we've all got, like, you can take an animal from one of us to the next. Like, there's Hawaii and Australia, Guam, I think, as well. And you can, like, move animals around between all of them because it's guaranteed they don't have rabies. But, like, otherwise, there are going to be, like, border complications about, like, bringing animals into and out of... I presume we have the same controls, and that's how we've been able to, like, you know, keep that status.
Well, yeah. I mean, God, what is it in... I know there's a type of wasp in the UK which is damaging our already pretty dire honeybee population. Because they wait outside the hives and catch tired honeybees when they're coming back and just, like, straight up murder them in, like, mid-flight. I mean, it looks really cool, but it's like, no, we need those. Yeah, and apparently, I think they're, like giant Asian hornets, somewhat ridiculous. They've got a ridiculously scary name. And apparently their sting's deadly as well, which just is wonderful. And you get it sometimes, like, I had a friend who used to work in a We're getting really off topic. I had a friend who used to work in a supermarket. And they have a whole list of things of what you do if you find a foreign animal in with things like bananas and stuff like that.
I know what foreign animal you find in with bananas.
Yeah, well, you know, like, if, you know, oh, here's our shipment of bananas from that country where bananas grow. Oh, look, here's a massive fucking spider. And there's, like, this, you know, like, you get your shipment of bananas in from the Congo?
No.
This is so wrong.
No, I'm pretty... right. Bananas happen.
Anyway, so there's this, you know, and what happens if there's a giant spider in there, or another such creature, because even if you let just one in, it could still destroy a significant population.
We have a massive
UK.
problem off our coasts at the moment because boats go to Japan and they pick up, like, they set down cargo and then they draw in seawater to use as ballast because obviously there's a huge weight difference when they're normally carrying the cargo, and they bring in tiny baby Japanese spider crabs, and then they get over back here, and then they just dump all the ballast so that they can take on more cargo, and then we have a fuck ton of spider crabs suddenly, and that's bad. We don't want that.
Yeah, but it's a thing to consider. They say the brown rats we have in the UK are foreign invaders as well, aren't they? And they killed all the black rats, which is why we never had another outbreak of the plague. ?
Fucked if I know.
Or was it fuck if I, like, you know, they say that lots of things aren't here, like,
Squirrels.
properly.
Grey squirrels wiping out our native red squirrels.
Grey squirrels is fucking
I've seen,
yeah.
like, one red squirrel in my entire life. There's, like, maybe 6 places in the whole of the UK where red squirrels still maintain viable populations. It's pretty sad.
It's pretty sad, because red squirrels are really cute as well, compared to, like, the grey squirrels. I think in the UK you're literally allowed to, like, go ham on grey squirrels. I'm not sure if this is...
I think it's, like, specific counties where that's the law, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I've heard that.
Do not go out and start killing grey squirrels by any means. Don't do this. But allegedly, you know, we're not really that kind towards them because they're not really supposed to be here. But yeah, I think I've only ever seen a red squirrel once, and it was in captivity, which is really sad.
No, I'm pretty sure I have, like, seen one on a path, but no, the red squirrel is pretty vulnerable to its grey cousin just coming in and just shitting disease all over the place, or whatever it is that they're doing that's killing them all off.
Yeah, I mean, the way my dad made it sound like when I was younger is like the grey squirrels were literally coming over here and beating up the red squirrels, and I was like, that's not fair though, Dad. And it was, these grey squirrels coming over here, stealing our red squirrel jobs. Disgraceful.
What jobs would squirrels have? Their CVs must be, like, absolutely terrible. They can't remember where they buried anything. I mean, I would employ them because I would feel sorry for them because I also worry about being employable. But then I would employ a fuck ton of red squirrels and we'd be getting into some pretty weird shit at that point, and I'd be starting to question whether I was in fact like half asleep in my bed at like 6 o'clock in the morning, which is generally when that sort of thing I perceive to happen to me.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think if you put a little, like, I think squirrels would be good builders. I think if you put like a little hard hat on a red squirrel, that looks really cute.
I mean, I agree. I don't necessarily know if cuteness while wearing a hard hat, like, translates into viable building ability. I think we would probably have to ask a naturist, or not a naturist. We should have to ask a naturalist. Don't ask a naturist that question. Try not to ask a naturist anything unless you also are a naturist, in which case you probably know where to find one to ask.
Yeah, I imagine naturists and squirrels don't get on that well because, nuts.
I mean, you went there, not me. Do you think there are naturists who just, like, start to learn a whole load about animals because they're so annoyed with people asking them animal questions because they don't know the difference?
Well, I mean, do you think naturalists start becoming nudists?
I feel like that's the kind of thing that really goes one way. Although possibly naturalists, like, try and make sure that they exist in a naturalist context, just so that it's really easy to explain very quickly to people when they tell them that I'm a naturalist.
Yeah.
It's like, have you ever seen David Attenborough not be, like, on somewhere, like a disembodied voice, or like in the middle of a jungle somewhere talking about something?
I saw him on the One Show once.
Oh. Well, that's the One Show. That's like
but
practically wildlife anyway.
Yeah, he was talking about frogs.
Oh, there you go.
So.
If you're in somewhere where you can't immediately explain to people what the difference between a naturist and a naturalist is, you have to be talking about animals constantly, or naked. One of the two, depending on which you don't want to be confused with.
Yeah, 100%. If you are a naturist or a naturalist, or maybe you're both, tell us your stories and experiences in the comments.
Tell Beth your stories and experiences on her Twitter. Unless you have, like, really cool animal facts, in which case it would probably be cool to tell us in the comments.
Yeah. Also, if you could tell me where bananas come from, that would be fucking fantastic. Cause I don't.
See, I was going to Google it, but then I thought, oh, hang on. Like, in that story you told, it was qualified that bananas come from the place that giant fuck-off spiders come from, and now I'm scared to Google where bananas come from. That'll be a scary...
I mean, that was just an example, I think.
No, that's a thing that happens. I can corroborate that. I know that happens. I've been told that before.
Yeah, but that's just one of those things. We've widely veered off topic.
I don't know if we're necessarily going to get back on, to be honest.
No.
And there's probably enough here really to talk about this subject. I mean, creatures and environments are not a thing that it's like incredibly difficult to get sorted out, as long as you remember that golden rule. Why is this here? What does it want? What motivates this monster? Maybe it's just like a thrall of some other being. That's fine, but then that raises questions. Who is the other being? All of it leads somewhere, and if you can string that into your campaign world, it'll all look a lot tighter knit together, and there'll be a lot fewer jumps that have to be made by your players, and environments and creatures are just as good a place as any to inject that. So this has been House of Bards. I have been Alex. I believe that after we finish recording I will continue to be Alex, and think possibly I am Alex right now. This is Beth.
It is Beth.
It is always Beth.
It has always been Beth. It has never been anyone else. I am eternal. I am always there at the beginning, at the end.
One day Beth will kill us all.
At the never was.
It's very awkward. If you want to contact us, our Twitter and Tumblr mine are both Cleaver Crummish, that is spelt clever, crumb as in a crumb of bread, and then ish on the end. And Beth is Baroness Bamf.
Mm-hmm,
I will
Baroness
spell those
Bamf.
in the description for your...
I'm not actual royalty, unfortunately, but my birthday is coming up soon, so if you want to buy me some sort of royalty thing, because you can definitely do that. I'll be very happy.
I mean, there's some people
for some countries
who believe that there's a very, very important distinction between this particular kind of buying. Some people say, well, you see, buying is a slang term. It's really called bribery. It's also very difficult, they have found, to do it to the Queen, because she does tend to have quite a lot of money.
Well, yeah, but like that, there are like micronations and stuff like that that sell like their lordships and stuff like that. Like Sealand is one of them. Sealand sells lordships. I would love to be a Baroness of Sealand if
Would you ever visit Sealand if you became a Baroness of Sealand? Yeah,
sure. It's not very big. It's only 10 kilometers wide.
But I'm just imagining like you visiting Sealand in like a helicopter.
I don't know if a helicopter could fit on there.
I believe that there are helicopters that are less than 10 kilometers wide.
Right, okay.
I mean, I don't know if I've seen a huge number of helicopters in my life, but I'm pretty sure that that is a thing.
Yeah. Well, no, I would visit Sealand if someone made me a Baroness, legitimately.
Fair enough. Please don't buy me any honours for anywhere. I have enough problems without becoming one of the bourgeoisie more than I am currently. With that, before we get hugely off topic again, the music for House of Bards is by Kevin MacLeod. We've had a lot of weird editing screw-ups this week, so I have not yet decided what the album art is going to be, but I will put attribution for it in the comments of the YouTube video, and probably in the description of anywhere else that this gets posted with that album art. So, yeah, for further episodes, keep subscribed to this channel. Might be posted other places, but this is where we will definitely be posting all the time. And we will speak to you, hopefully in a bit more organised way, next week.
Next week. We think it might be fantasy tropes. Are we doing that?
We can do fantasy that if tropes? You like. I know you want to do that that episode.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that. I think you'd have to take the lead on that one too.
That would be fine. I would be okay with doing that.
So those of you who think I talk too much and there should be a Beth-led episode, look out for that coming up, because that's going to be a thing.
Yep, you just remember that you brought yourself. You brought this on yourself. Beth-led episode. Brought it on yourself, listeners. Brought it on yourself.
Okay, sure. Podcast is over now.
Bye!
I mean, obviously this is the content that you came for. It's not like you came here for, like, pictures of Spider-Man. If you did come here for pictures of Spider-Man, then I'm sorry, but you're not going to get any.
Yeah.
Like, the image of 60s Batman villains from the villains episode is probably the closest you're ever going to get.
Unless we ever do common superhero tropes episode, because you can roleplay superhero games, and I would love that episode.
Okay, common superhero tropes episode. Pretty much any superpower with an interpersonal component is also a fetish. There we go. Episode done.
Oh, God.
You know it's true.
Yeah.
You know what classic Wonder Woman was like.
I know what classic Wonder Woman was like. Although,
and she like barely had any of those kinds of powers.
That's true. Although those were just the covers, on the inside it was very fun.
No, there is a sequence from the inside. There is literally a sequence where a ton of people on Themyscira do this weird shit where like half of them dress up as deer and then get like caught and skinned, air quotes, and put into a giant fucking pie. That is a thing that happens in classic Wonder Woman. It's on my Tumblr somewhere if somebody wants to look for it.
Okay, that is kind of true. Marston was a very interesting man.
Sure.
He was a very clever, interesting man who was also a bit kinky, and that's fine.
Okay.
He's by far one of the most interesting classic comic book creators, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not calling Bob Kane and the blokes who created Superman shit or uninteresting or anything. They were very interesting men in their own right. Just Marston was into a lot of really kinky sex. And if that's what I think makes a person interesting, that's my issue.
We're learning a lot about Beth this episode.